Let's go down to the hypershade, bring that back up, and let's load in the other maps. So in here there should be a diffuse map. Click on that, and that's got all our color information. I'm going to take this out color of my diffuse, click on it, left mouse click, hold, and drag it to where it says color. Right there. Perfect. I've loaded that map in, and that will bring in the color information. Let's come over to specular, and I want to do the same thing. I want to take this out color and plug it into the KS color. So I can come in here and just drag it into that. Or there's another way of doing it. So if you're not sure which one to plug it in over here, if I actually select the shader, it brings up the attributes. And you can see, you know, this is all broken up by diffuse and specular. Here's our specular color. So all I have to do is if I actually click on the node itself, middle mouse click and drag it. Ooh, you got to be careful. This is where it gets a little tricky. You got to make sure you select the shader and then select the specular node, middle mouse click, so the wheel mouse, click on that, hold it, and then drag it into color, and then that will make the connection. So this, you know, dragging it into the color of the specular makes more sense than dragging it into KS color. But that's what you have to do. You can do it either way, and that works for any connection inside the hypershade. All right, the other one I want to connect is the emissive, so the one right here. So again, I'll select that shader, scroll down, go to emissive color. So middle mouse click or the wheel mouse, click it, hold it, drag it over to color, and then let go, and that will plug it in. And then normally scale is set to 0 in here, but I found that sometimes you have to crank it 1, 2, or 3 depending on your lighting and your object on how strong you want that emissive to be. 2 seems to be a good starting point, but again, you can always come back and change it later depending on your renders. All right, so we've got 2 other maps, and these 2 maps I kind of deliberately left to the end because you have to do some special configuration. If you were to actually refer back to the documentation here, if you scroll down, you can see, hang on. And for some reason it's giving me a hard time. Oh, right, there we go. So right here you can see the roughness and the F0, which is our metal map. We have to run those through a gamma correction node typically. So this is converting the color space of these 2 textures into a color space that the computer or Maya and Arnold can read a little bit more efficiently than the standard color space that I got exported out of Painter. So it just has to go through this extra conversion process. So that's what we have to do here. But you can use a gamma correction node. I have a better node that does this, and this is going to be the gamma correct node, which is actually what they have here, but it's a little bit different in its settings. So let's check that out. So what I'm going to do is to actually bring up the gamma correct node. All I got to do is hit the tab key. So I'm pressing the tab key above the cap locks button, and I'd start typing in color correct, and it will bring up that name, and then all I got to do is hit enter, and then it makes that node. And then if you click on it, you can see all the different parameters that this node has. Let's make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. So we've got a color input. Then we can, it's got some Photoshop controls in here. We've got a hue shift, so we can change the color. If there's a particular color in the texture, we can change it. We can up the saturation or desaturate it, change the luminosity, which is the value. And then we can also play with the gamma correction right here at the bottom. So that's for the color, and we can also do that for the alpha of the texture also. So it's a pretty powerful node in the way it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the out color and run it into the color of the color correct. Right there. Boom. And then we come over to gamma under the color correct and change that to 2.2 for both inputs. So we're basically changing it for the red channel, green channel, and blue channel right there. Even though we might not need these two channels at the end, and I'll explain why here in a minute. If we now, let's connect this into our attribute down here in the shader. So if I go to out color, I'm going to hit this red, there's this red button right here that you can click on it and drag out the connection for. But we don't want to use all the colors because the specular roughness only sees in one channel. Right now we have 3 channels in all our textures, red, green, and blue. We only need to see one for it to work properly. So if I hit this little plus sign right here, and then I go to color, out color R, which is the only one we need, we click on it and we drag that into the specular roughness. And there you go. So now we're only using one channel from our texture to load that into the roughness. All right. So now we've added our gamma correct and we've loaded it in. And let's do the same thing for our metal map, or F0 map down here. So I'm going to, again, hit the tab key, type in color correct, hit enter, connect the out color to the in color in the node itself. I'm going to select it, make sure it comes to gamma, change that to 2.2 for all 3 inputs. And then now we got to plug this into the shader, which is a little bit harder to do. We want to actually, if we select the shader itself, we want to plug it into the reflections at normal is where we want to put it. So there's a couple ways of doing this. You can do it the method that I showed you, where you select the shader, middle mouse click on the node itself, hold it and drag it into that, and that will make the connection. And then you also have to make the Fresnel, turn on the Fresnel right up here. That actually applies the map. This, if you don't click this on, it does not apply this map. So it's really important you click that on. And so that's one way of doing it. Or the other way, if I just marquee select over a line, I can press delete, it disconnects it. The other way is to actually come over, and again, what I want to do is I want to just select the R, and I'm going to just drag that over and connect it right into this little orange connection at the top, which gives us a lot more parameters. It's going to pop up a little menu that says other, and it's going to say these are all the possible inputs for this shader. Again, this little shader node doesn't show it all, but these are all the possible ones. And the one we want to select is going to be this KSN, which is going to be the reflectance at normal that we want. We'll just connect that, and it will make that connection for us. So it's pretty nice. There's several different ways of doing that. It all depends on how you want to do it. And then there you go. Now you've got your shader all hooked up. Now the thing is about this is that you can come back to any of these color correct nodes and change the parameters. And normally if I want to fine tune any of my textures or anything, I usually do that here on the color correct, where I start playing a little bit with the value and the color gain to get a little bit more power and a little bit more control. All right, so let's render this out and see how this is starting to look. So here's the final result of me setting up that shader network for the Sci-Fi Crate, and I think the results look pretty good. I did mess with some parameters of the shader and I did tweak the lighting a little bit more for this final result. So let's just kind of briefly go over that a little bit. So inside the hypershade, I went to the roughness channel and the color correct node, and I went in here and I kind of played around with the value in the color correct, and I dropped that down a little bit, and that gave me some good results. So right a little bit lower. And again, this might be different for you and your results. You have to play around and see what you get. Another thing I played around with again was the F0 on the middle map, and again I played with that color correct node, and I dropped that value also down a little bit, and that gave me some good results also. The other thing I played around with was on the final shader itself and going over to specular and playing with the weight. We cranked it up to 1 before. I started dropping that down because I thought it was just way too shiny. So I started dropping it down to like a 0.6, 0.5, and I was getting much better results from that. So those are the things I kind of tweaked in the shader to dial it all in, and you might have to do the same. Oh, one more thing I did mess with too was the emission. I had it set to like 2 or 3. I actually almost had to crank it all the way up to about 4 to get the final result. But again, I didn't know that. I had to work with the shader and look at the renders to dial it all in. And then I get something that looks pretty good, I think. The other thing before I let you go is I also played around with some lighting, and I ended up changing up the position of the light. So I had the light coming from this corner of the red bus, but I actually took that light and I moved it over to the other side, and then I kind of dropped the exposure on it, up the samples to get a little bit better shading on it, and then played with the color temperature. I made it a little bit brighter, so I cranked it up to 11,000 on the color temperature. And I think it came out with a pretty good result. I was actually playing with some other lights, but I ended up with just using the IBL and this main light. Now, also when you get closer to a final render, you also want to play with your render settings up here and make sure you go and you set that to your 2K square, so you render out in the proper dimensions for your final renders. All right, so hopefully your sci-fi crate renders and your lighting will turn out well. And again, these are the parameters I used to render this out, and I think it came out pretty decent. All right, I will talk to you guys later.